I knew something was off the moment Gavin Vance walked into the boardroom. No greetings, no eye contact. Just that smug glide like a man who'd just discovered mirrors. He stood at the head of the long oak table wearing his late father's Rolex and the kind of cologne that made interns flinch. He didn't sit. He didn't even open his laptop. Instead, he pulled out a clipboard. Yes, a clipboard, and began reading names like they were items on a clearance rack. Realignment, he called it. Structural evolution. That's when he said my name. Dorsey Amara. SVP Finance. 17.5 years. Effective immediately. No explanation. No eye contact. Just a casual flick of his pen like swatting a fly. The silence in the room was physical. Janice from payroll looked like someone had unplugged her jaw. A junior associate dropped their metal water bottle, the clang bouncing off the conference room glass like a bell toll. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, tucked a stray curl behind my ear. And finally, after all these years of boardroom restraint, I used the 5 words I'd been saving. Thank you for your clarity. I didn't shout, didn't argue. I just walked to the window, picked up my desk plant, a resilient little succulent I'd kept alive through 3 CFO turnovers, and tucked my sunglasses-wearing bulldog photo from the credenza into my bag. I walked out without another word. But make no mistake, I wasn't calm. Not inside. Inside, I was reaching quietly, surgically for the file in my mind labeled Clause 9.4b, a clause no one remembered but me. One I'd had inserted like a tripwire, coiled and silent for years. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't text anyone. I went straight home, made tea I wouldn't drink, sat in silence so thick it rang in my ears. And when I finally opened the locked drawer beneath my laundry sink, there it was, the folder, the paper, the clause. The fuse wasn't lit when he fired me. It lit when I smiled. The folder was exactly where I left it, inside the fireproof safe beneath a bundle of utility bills I kept to make the drawer look boring. Dust hadn't settled on it. I checked every 6 months, even when I didn't need to. A habit born of mistrust and maybe a little foresight. Inside was my original contract printed on thick paper with the Wickmar and Stokes watermark barely visible under light. I flipped past the boilerplate, past the non-competes and executive provisions, past the pages no one reads. Then I stopped. There it was. Section 3, subpoint 9.4b. In the event of termination without documented cause, the company shall initiate a third-party forensic financial audit to be conducted by a firm of independent standing with a budget ceiling not to exceed $12,000. Initiation of the audit shall occur within 72 hours of notice. They had signed it. Not just legal, but Margot Vance herself, back when her name still meant steel. I slid the document into a manila envelope, sealed it, and placed it on my kitchen counter like it might burn through. Then I turned on my laptop. The termination email was already there. Staff reduction, the subject line read cold and unsentimental. No specifics. No attached performance review. Just a severance number and a link to HR's digital exit packet. I opened a new message, attached the PDF, and sent it to compliance, auditwitvancelegal.com. The inbox I wasn't supposed to know existed. No greeting, no sign-off, not even a subject line. Just the contract. Let it speak. When the email was gone, I closed the laptop and powered it down completely. I poured the tea I'd forgotten and let it go cold on the counter. Outside, the light shifted, and I could hear a neighbor's wind chime tapping against itself in the breeze. Somewhere downtown, Gavin was finishing his mimosa, thinking he'd won something. By the time he realized what I'd set in motion, it would already be walking through the front doors. It started with a spreadsheet, just another late-night audit on import logistics for our South American routes. I wasn't even supposed to be looking that closely. But the numbers didn't add up. Shipping fees were duplicated vendors, misclassified, and one shell company, Tressa Holdings, was getting monthly payments for port services at docks that hadn't existed in a decade. When I traced the paper trail to the founder's brother-in-law, I knew I'd stepped on something rotten. The number was just north of 7 figures. Not catastrophic. Just enough to unravel a board seat. I flagged it. Documented everything. Walked into the audit committee with the folder in one hand and my resignation already typed in the other. Margot Vance didn't blink. She sat at the end of the table in a charcoal dress and Pearl's fingers folded like she was playing chess with the company's conscience. When I finished, she didn't ask for clarification. She didn't thank me. "Do you want a bonus?" she said, or something that lasts longer. I paused. Then answered protection. She nodded once. Called in legal, dictated the clause like she was ordering lunch. Not emotional, not warm, but deliberate. That was the moment I stopped being a name in payroll and became something else in insurance policy. Clause 9.4b wasn't for me, not really. It was for her. For the kind of woman who didn't trust her own board, who knew someday she might not be able to stop a mistake fast enough. She wanted a fuse built into the infrastructure. A quiet tripwire with a salary. I never told anyone. Not legal. Not even my old assistant who once knew every line of my day. But I read it once every quarter like scripture just to remind myself it was real. Just to remember what power felt like when it didn't need to announce itself. That was 5 years ago. The fuse had stayed dry. Until now. And now the audit was on its way. They came without noise. No memo. No CC to HR. No Slack heads up. Just 3 people, 2 men in muted suits, and a woman with a tablet and a walk that said she had no time for small talk. They entered the Whitvance building at 8:14 a.m. Badges scanned, credentials checked. Security let them through with a nod and the kind of side eye that says, "Something's wrong, but I don't get paid enough to ask." Their destination wasn't accounting. It wasn't legal. They went straight for the executive archive room on floor 21. Only 3 people had keycard access. Theirs worked on the first try. Janice from payroll was the first to notice. She texted me one word. Audit. I didn't reply. She'd know soon enough. Meanwhile, Gavin was mid-sentence at a vision brunch he'd scheduled for the upper leads. The invite had read Strategy and Sunrise, complete with rooftop catering and overpriced citrus cocktails. I could picture him aviators tucked in his collar mimosa and hand-preaching value alignment while planning his next LinkedIn selfie. That's when his assistant Delaney leaned in and whispered the sentence that started the countdown. "The auditors are here. I heard about the reaction third hand." He laughed. Of course he did. Said something like, "Just compliance. Happens every few years." The laugh cracked halfway through, Janice told me later. He tried to move on, went back to discussing disruption frameworks. But his hand gripped the glass too tight. By 9:12 a.m., the auditors had requested access to corporate card records and executive reimbursement logs. By 9:17, they'd flagged a $4,800 expense labeled wellness alignment that traced to a luxury spa in Sedona. By 9:24, they requested all discretionary spending under Gavin's name. They were professionals. Efficient. No chatter, no reactions. Just scrolling, tagging, scanning. Data didn't lie. It didn't flinch. Somewhere on the 23rd floor, a printer jammed. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else closed a budgeting dashboard they hadn't touched since the last bonus cycle. The audit wasn't hunting. It was already collecting. It didn't take long for the files to start bleeding. First came the cigar lounge in Vegas, $14, $320, labeled under mentorship development. The receipt showed 2 aged whiskeys, 4 hand-rolled imports, and a private room fee. No names, no agenda. Just Gavin's card, time-stamped 3 days after a round of layoffs. Then came the goat yoga retreat. Booked under strategic renewal, the invoice bundled hot stone massages, organic juice flights, and a beachfront cabana reserved under an LLC that no one in accounting could identify. I watched from home as the fragments reached me through back channels. Screenshots from junior analysts, forwarded emails with no comment. Slack messages that started with, "You didn't get this from me." They uncovered a vendor called Skybridge East, a consulting firm that billed $128,000 for cultural innovation workshops. The address led to a P.O. box in Nevada. The signatory on the account had an Instagram bio that read, "Model, visionary, conscious investor." I remembered her. She'd been at one of Gavin's launch parties, wore sequins in daylight, and called herself a brand whisperer. When questioned, Gavin reportedly called it creative spending, then clarified it as brand adjacency investment. No one knew what that meant. The audit team didn't argue. They just moved on. At 11:03, they asked for access to the Innovation Sandbox discretionary fund, Gavin's pet project, a black box of corporate money he insisted on managing solo. Every CEO had their indulgence. His was buzzwords with a budget. By noon, they'd flagged 5 shell companies. 3 couldn't produce proof of service. 2 were registered to a luxury co-working space that offered no client records. Each one linked, however faintly, to someone Gavin had once invited to an off-site or tagged in a group photo at SXSW. The auditors didn't accuse. They highlighted, flagged, and moved forward. Data didn't need to raise its voice. And just before lunch, Janice texted me again. This time it was a photo Gavin mid-sentence, his mouth open, his eyes wide. Below it, her message. He just realized this isn't about receipts. It's about memory. When the photo arrived in my inbox, I almost laughed. It was blurry, taken from the mezzanine above the executive floor, just clear enough to show the back of a man in a dark suit standing before the audit team's screen. Beside him, a steel briefcase, cracked open, cables trailing. His posture was perfect, shoulders set like a blade, but it was the profile that caught me. The jawline, the way he held the clicker. Dominic Crane. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. Fresh out of Rutgers, nervous around phones, allergic to commas and spreadsheets. He once cried in the copy room after I made him redo a quarterly report 3 times for inconsistent headers. I didn't coddle him. I sharpened him. And now here he was, my former intern, leading the forensic audit into the empire that had just spit me out. I didn't reach out. Didn't dare. He didn't owe me anything. But still, I wondered if the way he paced the office, the deliberate quiet, the way he didn't explain himself, had traces of me in it. Reports came in faster after that. Flags on transfers, crypto chains, one vendor labeled empathy coaching that led to a website with stock photos and a single contact form. Dominic didn't call me, but he sent a message through Method. Every line of the report was clean, every source cross-verified. There was no flourish, no vengeance, just numbers that cut deeper than accusation. At 2:44 p.m., I got a forwarded chat from an analyst. Dominic's here. Not even blinking. He brought his own Ethernet cable. That was him. Quietly brutal. Exact. And somewhere inside the chaos of rising panic and collapsing spin, I felt it, not pride exactly. Not ownership, but a full circle burn. The boy I once broke down to build had come back not to rescue me, not to impress me, but to finish the job I'd spent years preparing for. By the time the board started asking questions, Dominic already had a heat map chart lit up with their signatures. The call came just after sunset. Margot Vance never texted, never emailed. Her number lit up my phone like it had its own gravity, pulling everything else quiet. I let it ring 3 times, not out of hesitation, but to remind her I could. Then I answered. Amara, she said. No pleasantries, just the name. We need to speak. The cafe she chose was deliberate, quiet antique with staff who knew when not to listen. I arrived 2 minutes early. She was already seated, black, coffee, untouched gloves folded beside her like punctuation. Her gaze swept over me as if taking inventory of posture, intention, and what I'd brought. I'd brought nothing. I didn't need to. You're punctual, she said. You're not, I replied. That earned a pause. Not offense. Calculation. I've read the findings, she said, tapping one finger against the porcelain cup. He is not equipped. Gavin was never equipped. You just hoped the chair would fix that. Margot didn't deny it. She exhaled once through her nose, barely audible. You were never meant to last, she said finally. But you endured. I stirred my espresso, then set the spoon aside. You built the fuse. He lit it. Her lips twitched. Not a smile. Something more surgical. I didn't expect you to hold it this long. You should have. Margot tilted her head. I need precision now, not survivors. I leaned back. Then you shouldn't have made him king. She didn't argue, didn't defend. Just sipped once, measured. The board will panic soon, she said. They'll want someone they trust. They don't trust me. They will. After you finish what he started ruining. I didn't nod. I didn't agree. But she knew I wouldn't walk away, not entirely. Not when the structure still bore my fingerprints. Not when the foundation was cracking and I still knew where the rebar lived. Margot reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. Not official. Not formal. Just paper and weight. The meeting's at 9, she said. No calendar invite? No minutes. Then she smoothed her jacket and left the check untouched. I didn't open the envelope until I got home. The envelope held a single card, thick ivory stock. No letterhead. Just a meeting time, a room number, and one sentence beneath attendance confidential. No mention of Gavin. That omission spoke loudest. The next morning, I walked into the 42nd floor conference suite. 7 board members sat under half-lit sconces, the room still smelling faintly of tension and bad coffee. Margot stood at the head of the table. No one looked rested. We need stability. She said, eyes never leaving mine. Not cleanup. Direction. Precision. I listened. Then I said what I'd rehearsed on the drive over. No. A ripple passed through the room. One board member cleared his throat. Another blinked like maybe he'd misheard. But I wasn't there to negotiate nostalgia. I'm not here to mop up after a boy who played CEO, I continued, unless I'm allowed to replace the carpet. Margot didn't flinch. She'd expected that. I see, she said. You'll let it burn. I'll let the structure prove whether it's worth saving. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. No name, just a screenshot. A group chat. Username Gavman. The message she probably cried in her Prius. Took that sad plant and left like finance was dead. Another reply below it. El Mao. Told you she was dead weight. I stared at the screen. Not angry. Cold. Still. I turned it toward the room. This is who you let hold the reins. No one spoke. Margot just reached into her folder and slid over a badge. Gold unassuming, but with the words Executive Oversight engraved into the center. Effective immediately, she said. I picked it up, weighed it in my palm. Then I looked at the chair Gavin once sat in, arms wide, spine loose, like power was comfort. I didn't take that seat. I walked to the head of the table, the one Gavin never earned, and I sat. Straight-backed, silent. Margot slid a tablet toward me. You'll want to see this next one, she said. The numbers were damning. Vendor names no one could verify. Payouts masked through discretionary codes. A $327,000 wire labeled blockchain architecture sent to a company with no tech staff and no deliverables. But what made the board lean forward wasn't the money. It was the pattern, the escalation, the silence between each approval. I let the evidence settle. I didn't summarize. I didn't perform. I simply clicked to the next slide. This isn't about mismanagement, I said. It's about exposure. Legal, financial, institutional. A murmur. A cough. One member scribbled something in the margin of his printed agenda, though I doubted he'd read the rest. That's when I pulled out the original document. Cream-colored paper, slightly faded, signed in fountain pen. Clause 17E. The room went still. This clause grants any executive with 10 years of service and financial compliance authority the right to freeze C-suite operational control if supported by an active audit showing material harm. They all looked at the signature. The founders, William Vance. I pointed to the ink smear at the bottom, a whiskey stain decades old. Margot didn't speak. She didn't need to. The door burst open. Gavin, breath short, eyes wild. What the hell is going on? No one answered. He turned to me. You can't do this. You think they'll follow you? I stood. Not to yell, just to be seen. I'm not asking for trust, I said. I'm activating protocol. I slid the clause forward. He snatched it up, reading like he could will the words to vanish. This is a relic. Margot finally spoke. It's binding. He turned to her. Mom. She took the executive order form from her folder, signed it in 3 clean strokes, and placed it beside the clause. Effective immediately, she said. Gavin Vance is suspended from all operations pending audit resolution. No shouting, no guards, just a compliance officer at the door and a blank envelope. Gavin didn't move at first. But when he did, it was slow. Resigned. I watched him leave without gloating. Then I turned back to the table and opened the next file. By the end of the week, the furniture in the executive wing had changed, not physically, but the posture, the noise, the pace. Meetings no longer started with compliments or slides. They started with numbers. Spreadsheets lined the walls. Vendor contracts were dissected like crime scenes. Discretionary funds were frozen. Reimbursements rescinded. And one by one, resignations slid quietly across desks, some voluntary, most not. The board stopped asking if I planned to stay. They just followed instructions. Every time I opened a flagged transaction, I felt the same sensation, not anger, not satisfaction, but incision. This wasn't revenge. This was a procedure. Dominic's team worked in silence. No commentary. Just columns and receipts, timelines and timestamps. He once paused at my shoulder, handed me a USB, and said only, "This one's layered." I nodded. We didn't need more than that. One assistant in legal confessed that she'd been told to backdate approvals. Another quietly forwarded emails she said she didn't feel right about. Every thread came back to the same pattern: Gavin's voice, Gavin's fingerprints, Gavin's vision written in jargon but funded in fraud. I didn't gloat. I didn't send any emails that started with, "As you may recall." I deleted more messages than I answered. Most of them said some version of, "I always respected you." I hope you know that. I didn't need them to respect me now. I needed them to respect the system again. Margot left the floor without ceremony. She paused in the doorway, glanced at the red-lit dashboards on the wall, and said only, "Fix it or finish it." Then she walked away, heels soft against the carpet, like she already knew which one I'd choose. That night, I stayed late. Not because I had something to prove, but because the data hadn't stopped unraveling. There was always another invoice, another name, another shell. I looked out the window at the skyline, blinking back to life in grids. The empire wasn't saved. It was open. And tomorrow, the audit would speak louder than any of us.